Hi everybody and welcome back to Coachy TV. In this video we're going to look at the second of the more anaerobic glycolytic type workouts that you would start doing in the specific prep part of the season, of the cross-country season or the track season. We're really dealing with cross-country as we're filming this here in the middle of July. And that is the combination of intensive tempo that leads into special endurance 2. I did a video that looked at intensive tempo leading into special endurance 1. I'll put it in the video description down below. And there's a lot of things that are somewhat similar between this and special endurance 1, but there's a key difference that's sort of highlighted by the picture here that I'll talk about in 1 second. These are among the important workouts to do during specific prep. They were not important to do during general prep or your summer training because of the way this energy system, the anaerobic glycolytic system, peaks. But they are very important when you start to get to this part of the season. We're really going to look at how does intensive tempo and special endurance 2 enhance performance in the cross-country 5K, and how can we modify this for the cross-country season versus how you might do this in the track season. What you're seeing here is the 2019 Wharton boys cross-country team during one of our special endurance 2 workouts at a local park. And the big difference here, we talked about in special endurance 1 that you would want to do that on a track spiked up, and you can obviously see here, this is not in a track, it's in a park on grass, and there's a real specific reason for that we'll get into in this presentation, why this is you're going to get something different from doing special endurance 1 versus just doing special endurance 2, and why you would do both of these throughout your training year. I am Kyle Giacono. I'm the head boys cross-country and track coach at Wharton High School in Tampa, Florida. I've been for the last 7 years. If you'd like a closer look at my credentials, they are on the screen. So in the macrocycle here, there are 5 parts. The first one is the transitionary phase, which is rest and recovery. And then you've got 4 parts that have to do with actual training. You have to give yourself a rest period in between your seasons before you get started, and then you get ready with general prep, which is just preparing for more intense work. We're dealing with the specific preparation phase where we're getting specifically prepared for the demands of the race itself. And that's why we're adding the anaerobic glycolytic system. The general preparation phase, this is like your summer season. It's why miles are typically looked at in this phase, although there's a lot of other things that are going on that are not just mileage specific. And then you get into specific prep, you're dealing with, really it should be all the demands of the race when you're starting to add in the anaerobic glycolytic system, and we'll see why that is in a couple later slides here. It'll lead directly into the pre-competitive phase, which is preparing for the most important meets, and this is where the hardest training of the year is. And then the competition phase, the big time races. For this, I'm getting the idea of getting somebody ready for a state meet for cross country, which for us in Florida is hopefully going to be on November 7th. So that's kind of the whole idea here. Now, all these phases are, I would say, equally important to your macrocycle, but it doesn't mean that they're the same length. The specific preparation phase is typically looked at anywhere from 4 to 5 weeks. I like 5 weeks the way I set up this hypothetical macrocycle that I've been kind of taking you through on these presentations, and I'll highlight that a little bit more when we get to that part of the presentation.
So here are the workout types that are you would want to be doing during your specific preparation phase. The first and second column here were the critical and the important workouts that we were doing during general prep, and those are still important during specific prep. We're just getting this new type of workout types that if you watch the videos on general prep, I'll put them in the description down below. We said these were not important during general prep, but they now do become quite important. They're really not any more important than what I would call these important workouts, but it's just because you haven't been doing them. You have to make sure that you are doing them now, starting in specific prep. The critical workouts during general prep and then also specific prep, and they'll also be critically important during the other 2 phases, are the long run, the VO2 max run, including VO2 max testing, and the recovery run. These workouts are critically important to success in developing the key factors needed for success in the cross-country 5K. They focus on improving VO2 max, both central and peripheral, and we'll see in a subsequent slide why that is so important. The important workouts are the alactic run. I've shown those as fly 30s. Your various hill runs, they start as short hill intervals, and they will, in specific prep, become medium hills, and by the end of specific prep, they'll become long hill intervals also. And then the tempo run, also known as the lactic threshold run. These workouts are still very important for XC 5K success, but they're less so than the critical workouts. They focus mainly on running economy and specific strength, which is important, but not as important as VO2 max, which again we'll see in the next slide. The idea being is you want to make sure that these are taken care of before you take care of these when you're planning them out, and if something falls by the wayside here, let it happen. As I mentioned, quite important. Not that they're any more important than these ones, but you didn't do them in general prep, so you better make sure you're finding time for them in specific prep because they're starting from zero, where these you did work on in general prep. So these quite important workouts are intensive tempo, special endurance 2, the ones we're highlighting here, special endurance 1, and extensive tempo. The extensive tempo workout video, I will also put in the description down below, as well as the special endurance 1 and intensive tempo. And these are different for this key reason. These workouts cause improvements in the anaerobic glycolic system, exposing the body to acid. They focus on creating adaptations to buffer this acid, reducing or delaying fatigue. So the idea here, these main things are separated for that very reason. These ones are all about VO2 max. These ones, while they can improve VO2 max, are all about economy and strength, and those kind of do go hand in hand. Tempo run is a little bit different than the economy you get from these two, but it does sort of play into each other. And then these ones are all about the acid and the anaerobic glycolytic system, and we'll see why why this is kind of prioritized here in the next slide. Because the race metrics of the 5K have to be considered when deciding what's important. And if we're looking at the 10K, the 800, these things might be a little bit different as you were looking at it. So in terms of the race metrics, what is the most important factor in who wins and who loses the 5K? Study that was released by Ingham in 2008. They looked at a bunch of different things, and they found in the 5K, because they looked at a bunch of different races, whoever had the best VO2 max won 94.3% of the time. Very close to a sure thing, and that's why those critical workouts in the last slide, all the ones that really focus on VO2 max, either central VO2 max or peripheral VO2 max, why those are critical because of this. Almost 95% of the time, who has the best VO2 max wins. And then you have those other factors that deal as well as race strategy, but where you should spend your most time, why you have to take care of the critical ones first, is because of this. This is almost as sure of a sure thing as you can get in racing. Race-specific VO2 max presented by USATF distance curriculum. We'll find that the 5K is run very close to VO2 max, which is typically associated with 2-mile pace, 97% of it. And again, that's probably why that association is so close. It's almost run at VO2 max, and whoever has the best VO2 max wins 94.3% of the time. It makes perfect sense why that would be so closely associated. And then this study that was released by Dr. Matter and Dr. Hartman in 2018, they worked very closely with the IAAF. When looking at the 5K, we'll find that 4% of the energy came from the collectively called the alactic system, or the ATP that's sitting in your muscles when you start, and then the phosphocreatine system that is going to be recharging it. The aerobic system is making up the lion's share of the energy, which makes perfect sense, 86% of it. And then this is why these are quite important. The anaerobic glycolytic system does contribute 10% of the energy. So if we want to get everything rocking on full cylinders at the most important meets, we have to make sure that we take care of this. But the reason why we're not doing this in general prep is, and we'll look at in a slide or two here a little bit later, is the timing of how these energy systems peak. The ATP phosphocreatine, or the alactic system, never really peaks out. It always kind of improves a little bit with the specific strength and the way your body produces energy that way. The aerobic system has a peaking window of 20 plus weeks, typically out to about 25, 26 weeks, and the anaerobic glycolytic system is much shorter, about half of that, and we'll see why that is here a little bit. But that's one of the key reasons here why we have to start developing the anaerobic glycolytic system. We don't want to throw away 10%. And this is actually at race pace. If you go out and walk a 5K, it'll probably be about 99% aerobic. The other two energy systems will always be contributing some type of energy, but at race pace, you get the increased demand from these other two energy recharging mechanisms, and the aerobic system can do more of the work because it's at lower intensity, but you won't get any, obviously, race success that way. All right, the law of training specificity, very important thing to always consider, says that every training session has a specific effect on the athlete, which may or may not be desired for that event. Very important. If you do workout A, you're going to have an adaptation A in your body. Your body's only going to adapt to what you give it. If you want adaptation B, you don't do workout A. You better do workout B. Again, that's obviously a very dumbing down of this, but that's basically the way it works, is if your body basically adapts to specifically what you give it. It's not going to adapt to what's not being given. Your body is very systematic. It's based on calories and survival and energy, and it's only going to build up structures that you're basically convincing it needs for something. You're tricking it basically into thinking it needed to survive, but that's the idea behind that. But the really important thing is, after the comma here, is we have that idea that effect that you're giving it from the specific training session may or may not be desired for the event. So this is the event right here, but just because you're doing a workout doesn't mean that you're helping improve your odds of winning. We know here that VO2 max is critically important, why those workouts are critically important that we saw in the last slide. We know that it's run very close at it, so again, we better develop that VO2 max, and then this is sort of the rest of the story here, or a lot of the rest of the story. There's other metrics here that you definitely want to consider, but it's the idea of, okay, 10%, that's something I don't want to just throw away. I better figure out where and when to do this, but I better not rob the aerobic system, and that's really what the idea here is. How will intensive tempo and special endurance 2 improve anaerobic glycolytic fitness? Okay, that 10%. And will this at all negatively impact aerobic fitness, because this still needs to be king? This is directly associated with VO2 max, so we have to get all that going on. The ATP phosphocreatine system really is not going to negatively impact aerobic development in terms of acid development. Now, if you just did this all day and didn't develop aerobically, then it certainly could. But doing this in the appropriate amount probably isn't going to negatively impact your aerobic system, provided you're doing it within the parameters that make sense with alactic training. Okay, so where do both intensive tempo and special endurance 2 runs fit in? This is the energy system continuum. It's based on VO2 max pace, which is right in the middle here. It is from USATF distance curriculum, which is why it's based on VO2 max, because it's from the distance curriculum and not the sprint curriculum. The idea being is everything from VO2 max and to the right of this is an aerobic type workout. And anything to the left of it, which is going to get a bigger percentage, this is a percentage number here, is only going to be faster because it's from anaerobic glycolytic energy production, because VO2 max is the fastest aerobic pace. Anything faster, which is denoted by the left-hand side of this chart, has to come from the either the anaerobic glycolytic system or the anaerobic alactic system, which is all the way out here. So we're really worried more about this whole orange area from about 100% here to right here for anaerobic glycolytic type training. And what we'll find is first, intensive tempo is right here, pretty close to VO2 max. It's a little bit faster. Intensive tempo, you see it's 80 to 90% best effort. So it's relatively, it's sort of a medium type glycolytic workout. And based on VO2 max, it's at 110 to 112% VO2 max. So that's how much faster it is than VO2 max. Intensive tempo is medium anaerobic glycolytic work with moderate acid accumulation. Think mile pace. If you look up here, 1500, 1600 mile, it's all the same thing. There's obviously an increased accumulation of acid in the mile, but it's not as fast as some of the other races that produce even more acid. So that's what you want to kind of think. The reason why the acid grabs you in the mile isn't that for any one lap it's a problem. It's the accumulation of it, and that's kind of what this workout is going to get you close to, is building it so that you can get ready for more intense work a little bit later on. And then special endurance 2 is also very close to the mile pace, but it's that next race that you would do. Special endurance 2 is getting into the 90 to 100% best effort, so it's kind of just as this transitions from intensive tempo to a little bit faster, 120% of VO2 max, or basically 800 meter pace. Special endurance 2 is very hard anaerobic glycolytic work, causing loss of acid to accumulate, just like it does in the 800, the half mile. The half mile, the 800, is probably the race where you have to run with the most pain. I would say the 400 meter hurdles obviously too, but the 400 is the race you have the most pain afterwards because of acid accumulation. But in the 400, you have the benefit of usually you're close to the end when you stop running. In the 800, you got a whole nother lap to go. It's obviously a slower first lap, but you have to kind of deal with the acid. And that's what Special Endurance 2 is really going to try and get you ready for. Can you run when you've got this increased accumulation of acid? And that's one of the things that's kind of separates Special Endurance 2 from Special Endurance 1 type workouts. So I want to just briefly touch on acid accumulation because I really went through this in detail in the Special Endurance 1 video. I'll put it in the description down below if you want a closer look. But basically, this is lactic acid. It's the thing that your body produces as a waste product from anaerobic glycolytic type training. This lasts for about a quarter second in your body, and then it splits it right here at this red and white line. The left-hand side or screen left-hand side of this bigger molecule is shuttled back to the liver to be turned into, say, more stored glucose later on. This is what causes the problem. This is the free hydrogen ion. If you remember from your chemistry class, things that typically start with an H are acidic, and this is no different. This is what causes the drop in pH, which causes the fatigue if it accumulates in your body. Basically, any workout above a lactic threshold will accumulate this acid. It's wrong to say that acid-producing energy ever turns on because you just sitting here watching this presentation are producing acid. But when it's being pushed harder, if you're going at harder intensities for an extended period, it can build up. Mitochondria can clear acid, and this is kind of one of the important things, though, is it can clear acid using the electron transport chain to produce ATP and aerobic respiration, but this is complex and slow, so the acid production can sometimes outpace it, especially if you're doing a workout where you're specifically trying to get it. That's the acid right there that I was mentioning before. As acid accumulates, pH drops, causing acidosis and fatigue due to reduced enzyme effectiveness and muscle pain. That's the problem. Your body does not like being in low pH or acidosis, so that's what causes the fatigue. If workouts are too intense, and this is the important thing I did want to make sure we highlight here, acid levels can spike, causing mitochondrial damage and poor adaptation. So the idea being is we try and take through, first starting in this type of workout with extensive tempo, which I'll put the video in the description down below. Then we go to intensive tempo, and then we go to special endurance 2 as we get used to it. If you go out the first day and try and do, you know, a really fast special endurance 2 workout without some of these steps along the way, you're just going to dump a ton of acid into your body, and it's not going to be used to it. It's not going to have the mechanisms that can neutralize the acid. And while mitochondria use it in the electron transport chain and aerobic respiration, mitochondria, if they're just swimming in it, it can damage it. It can actually kill your mitochondria. This can hurt aerobic performance. That's one of the things we don't want. And if you just throw it at your body all of a sudden, it's going to cause poor adaptation. We want to kind of ease into it, along with things like the hill workouts that you hopefully did in general prep in the beginning of specific prep, and the alactic workouts. It's not acid producing, but it kind of gets your body, well, everything's acid producing, but not acid accumulating, but it also gets your body ready to run fast so that you can adapt more correctly to the faster intensities. We want to do a step-by-step process with all this. Do not just throw this at them or yourself all at once. And to kind of highlight that, we've got these acid levels at various intensities. This is on average for a trained athlete. An untrained athlete will never get to 24 millimoles of lactate because they just won't be able to handle it. They're going to be much lower. Somebody who's untrained is much more hurt by high, even lower acid levels, essentially. They don't have the aerobic system to deal with it in terms of clearing it, and they don't have some of the things we're going to talk about here in subsequent slides that can buffer the acid. But as I mentioned, at rest, you just sitting here watching this presentation or whatever you're doing, you're going to have about 0.8 to 1.8 millimoles of lactate. Again, highlighting the fact that this is always on the anaerobic glycolytic system. And then up to lactic threshold, which is, again, anything faster than this in your body accumulates acid, it's about 2.5 millimoles of lactate. So when you're doing a tempo run, this is where you're right at. It's both producing and clearing it in unison. You start getting into 10K pace, which is basically critical velocity. Well, now we're getting an accumulation of acid. Your body can't deal with, on the mitochondrial level, clearing it, so your body's going to have to start neutralizing it. The 10K is obviously a very long race, so over that period of time, it's also going to accumulate. But the 5K, being half the distance of the 10K, is going to produce more acid because it's that much more fast. Same thing with the 3,200 meters. It's about 2/3 of the distance of the 5K, and you're going to get to 12 millimoles of lactate. 1,600 meters, 1,500 meters, 15 millimoles of lactate. Again, this is intensive tempo pace. This is like VO2 max aerobic power pace. You've got 800 meters, again, a little bit faster, 21 millimoles of lactate. This is special endurance 2 type workouts. And then special endurance 1 type workouts are 400, which is 24 millimoles of lactate. And the reason why we measure lactate, thinking back to that last slide, obviously before we go a little into it too, you saw how much bigger that molecule was. The reason why we measure the lactate isn't because the lactate is a problem, it's just because it comes in a 1-to-1 ratio of with that hydrogen ion, so it's much harder to measure the hydrogen ion, so that's why they measure the lactate, even though the lactate actually isn't causing the issue. Okay, so our goal is to get them, and them is either if you're training yourself or if you're training a team or whoever, get them used to race-specific acidity levels so they can develop the specific ability to buffer this acid concentration. And buffer the acid concentration, that word is chosen for a specific reason, and it's because no human can actually tolerate acid accumulation in muscles. And that is a term that's been thrown around. No human can tolerate acid, so get that idea out of your mind. Here is the analogy, and I've used this in the past, but it's really, it's an important thing to kind of keep in mind. Think of it like this. If you turn a stove on and you put your hand on that stovetop, it's going to burn you. You do that every day for a year, it's still going to burn you every time you put your hand on that stovetop. Maybe you develop a little callus so you can leave it there for maybe a quarter second or something, but it's still going to burn you every single time. In the same way that your mitochondria, your enzymes, your muscle fibers are going to be metaphorically burnt by the acid every time it is accumulating in the muscles. The mitochondria can't deal with it, your muscles don't like it, the enzymes don't like it, the mitochondria don't like it, boom, you get acidosis and it causes the fatigue every single time. So we're not going to be able to tolerate the acid. We are going to buffer the acid with some things that we're going to talk about in this next slide, things that neutralize the acid. So acid and base create more of a neutral if they're in unison. That's what we want to do. So basically what we want to do is, instead of just putting our hand on that stove over and over again, or producing acid that's, metaphorically burning, the different things causing fatigue, we need to put something in between our muscles, our enzymes, our mitochondria, and these other things that are, hindered by acidosis. We need to put something in between to buffer that acid burn. In the same way that if you've got a stovetop on, you put an oven mitt on if you want to reach into the stove or whatever, so you don't get burnt, right? It's to delay or prevent that burning from happening, and that's what we're trying to do in our cells, these working muscles, with this acid-based training. So too much acid too fast, we already talked about, can damage mitochondria, reducing aerobic energy production, so we need to slowly introduce this to them in a safe, methodical way. Intensive tempo and special endurance too will expose the athlete to acid levels higher than what they'd experience in a race in the cross-country 5K, so that as this long race is going on, it's not an issue. It's kind of the reason why at the beginning of the season, they're really, really hurt. They're really, they're trying to finish and they just don't seem to have that kick. And by the end of the season, as you've done more racing and you've done more of these types of workouts, they seem to be less fatigued at the end. It's for this reason, because they're used to a higher level of acidity and they can neutralize or buffer this acid throughout the entirety of the race. All right, so what are the reasons that the anaerobic glycolytic system improves? It's basically this main thing. It's increased acid buffering capacity, like we were just talking about. After exposure to acid, especially in a safe, methodical way, not dumping a ton of it all at once, the body stores various products to neutralize this acid, reducing or delaying muscle fatigue, right? You're going to be fatigued at the end of a 5K one way or another. We want you to be fatigued at the end, after you've crossed the finish line, not going out too fast, not avoiding this type of training to where they're going to be dead at, in the middle. We want it to delay muscle fatigue until the race is over. This is sometimes called acid tolerance, but as we already said, this is not really what's happening. One of the things, as you get more blood, hemoglobin is actually a base. So hemoglobin, one of the things that your muscles do after they have too much acid is they can dump the acid into the bloodstream, and if you've got more hemoglobin with the increased blood, it can neutralize some of this acid. This is the really big one for inside your cells. It stores more sodium bicarbonate. You may have heard that before. It's something you might take for an upset stomach or a heartburn. It's because it neutralizes acid, and your body can store this in the working muscles too. One of the interesting things, actually, if you're training at altitude, one of the reasons why you should, if you do train at altitude, you should do your aerobic work at altitude and your anaerobic work at as low as you can, hopefully under 1,500 meters, because that's really where these things happen. Your body won't store sodium bicarbonate at altitude over 1,500 meters for some reason. It's why the best training are living up high, over 1,500 meters, doing your aerobic work up high, but anything that is glycolytic in nature to try and come down to a lower altitude so your body will store the sodium bicarbonate so you can actually do this work effectively. There's other things that your body stores, but this is probably the best well-known one that your body does store in the working muscles. And blood plasma protein, for the same reason as hemoglobin, can neutralize it. We have more of this, and it's a base, so as your body dumps the acid into the blood, it can neutralize it. These three things together are the biggest training effect from anaerobic glycolytic system improving. You're also just going to have increased muscle strength. Again, this is something that kind of starts with your hill work and your fly 30 work, fly 30 repetitions, and your short hill intervals that become medium hill intervals. You're going to be stronger, you're going to be able to produce more energy. This is a factor in anaerobic glycolytic training. It's a smaller factor than the ones above, but it's a factor. More anaerobic enzyme activity, especially, specifically glycolytic enzyme production in the cytoplasm of the cells. You have more of this, you can produce more energy, the system improves. And this is kind of an interesting thing too. It's the increased cell pores to remove acid. So as I said, you've got your muscles, you have certain ones that are more glycolytic, and they have a tendency to produce this acid. As they produce acid, this type of training, they're going to develop more pores that are specifically designed to allow hydrogen ions to pass through out into the blood system, hopefully so it can be somewhat neutralized by these things, but also so that the blood can take it to more aerobic type muscles that have more mitochondria that can, neutralize some of this acid through the electron transport chain. So your body has like one type of pore that brings the hydrogen ions in. I actually did a video that talked about this on muscle fiber composition. I'll put it in the description down below. But that's only through aerobic training that happens. Anaerobic glycolytic training helps your cells that produce a lot of this energy produce more of these pores so it can remove more of the acid as it gets a little bit more overwhelmed and delay this fatigue a little bit too. And then an athlete getting older, an athlete who's more on the, closer to full maturity is going to be able to buffer a little bit more of the acid. It's going to be less painful for them. If you've ever put a younger type runner who has not really started puberty or finished puberty yet and they just do not handle it well, don't do it with those types of athletes. It's just not beneficial for them at all because they have to be a little bit more mature in their central nervous system and their enzyme production and muscles. Everything needs to be a little bit more mature before you want to do this type of training with somebody. High school age is about the first age that most people can do it. You've got early maturers that maybe in middle school can, but that's the exception, not the rule. And really, for girls, it's going to happen a little bit earlier. Boys, sometimes it doesn't happen until their junior year where they can really handle a lot of this type of work. Currently our number one runner at Wharton High School, he had a lot of trouble with this his freshman and even the beginning of his sophomore year, and now, as a distance runner, he's too flat in an 800 in our abbreviated track season we just had, and he's also 52 seconds in a 400, which obviously isn't going to score at the state meet in anything in the 400, but for a 2 mile or 5K kid, it's pretty good, and a lot of it has also been because they've gotten older as well as some of the specific training that we've put them through. So we talked about the aerobic system taking 20 plus weeks. Why does this system require only a focus starting in specific prep? And it's for this reason. Adaptations improving the anaerobic glycolytic system are mostly, not entirely, but mostly biochemical in nature, okay? Meaning they're not developing body structures. This requires less time, 9 to 11 weeks, and you can hold it for about another couple weeks on the back end with some specific targeted type workouts, right? The plasma, the hemoglobin, the sodium bicarbonate, this is all biochemical in nature. And this is structural in nature, but it's very small structural in nature, these pores that are going on here, and so are the enzymes. This can happen fairly quickly. I mean, this is still a long period of time. It's more than 2 months, but it's half the amount of time of aerobic development that requires the building of a bigger heart, more capillaries, much more structural in nature type things that take more time. Now, muscle strength can take a little bit more time, but you also did things like I mentioned, your fly 30 type work, alactic work, and your hill intervals, short hills becoming medium hills, that we're also developing this through your general prep for that specific strength type of work. So you have developed this going into it, so it's not just they're going from 0 to 100 all of a sudden. But that's the reason why we don't work on this until specific prep, and when we get to our hypothetical macrocycle, you'll see this is the timing that I've set up, basically 12 weeks to the state meet. So 9 to 11 weeks, and then you can hold on to it for a little bit also. So the design adaptations are fairly similar with special endurance IT work and special endurance 2 work that we talked about with special endurance 1, but as I mentioned, with one key difference that comes from this type of work that we'll get to, but you want to continue the peaking window for anaerobic glycolytic system. It needs 9 to 11 weeks to peak. Many people actually don't really start this soon enough in their cross-country season. If most state meets are in November, you'll see a lot of people that won't really start doing this until the end of September, beginning of October, and that's actually too late to get full benefit from this. Some people do it during the summertime too, and that can mess them up, but I would find most people probably wait too long to actually do this. Most people, this means starting around the beginning of first week of official practice in most states. For us in Florida, our first week of official practice is July 27th. I'm not recommending doing it then, but about 3 weeks after, it's time to get kind of going with some of these things if you really want to maximize this energy contribution. Medium intensive tempo work transitions to more intensive special endurance 2 type work. Starting easier and progressing with through these different paces will prepare the athlete for faster paces later in the training year. It's going to continue storing some acid buffering agents at higher levels. And you, as we mentioned, you did the short and medium hills and alactic fly 30s, and you also hopefully did a couple rounds of extensive tempo, video in the description down below. That also helped prep them for this faster type running, so they're not going from, you know, no fast running in general prep and early specific prep. You never got too far away from fast running because of this other stuff that you were doing even in general prep. And this is the big thing, is reducing or delaying acidosis fatigue in races. The ability to neutralize acid at the working muscles and blood will keep the pH close to 7.0 for as long as possible in the race. This, along with proper race strategy, will allow stronger finishes. Very similar to what we talked about with the Special Endurance 1 type video here, but as we get into the design here, I'll show you why there's one real key difference here with the adaptations for Special Endurance 2 and IT work that's very similar to Special Endurance 2. So this is a slide that I borrowed from a video I did on anaerobic workout pace summary. So basically, these two paces, as you saw on the continuum, are right next to each other in terms of things like extent and intensity, but there actually is a big gap really in between them if you really kind of highlight it. So take intensive tempo off for a second, but Special Endurance 2 is going to be at 93 to 95% 400 meter pace, or that's basically 800 meter pace, right? Intervals are typically either intervals or reps, meaning incomplete recovery or complete recovery. This is going to be longer than Special Endurance 1, so this is 300 to 600 meters. Whereas Special Endurance 1 was 150 to 300 meters. So that's why you can't go 400 meter pace for 600 meters. So that's the idea here. With about 300 meters to 2,400 meters of total work, I definitely would say for somebody getting ready for more the distance type races, you probably want to go to the longer end of that. This is more for, you know, your sprinters, your 400 meter runners, and that kind of thing. And then intensive tempo is quite a bit easier because the miles obviously run much slower than, say, the 800. It's at 85% best 400 meter pace, or I would give a range of 84 to 86%. And again, intervals are about 350 to 500 meters, typically with 2,400 meters to 4,000 meters of total work. The idea being is you can do a lot more of this because it's slower. So I'm doing this, it says, based on percentage of 400 meter pace, and that is directly from the USATF coaching curriculum, not the distance curriculum, but the coaching curriculum overall. But the idea here is, I mean, it's based on current best 400 meter pace, but I think there's a really important variant for the cross-country season, because are we really going to want to do 400 meter testing in cross-country, meaning a day where you show up and you do a 400 meter test as a core part of your training year? And the short answer is you certainly can. You can do that. And USATF has broken down these paces as percentages of current best 400. So you could do a 400 test every 3 weeks. And in fact, the coaching curriculum for USATF says that's what you should be doing. Okay, so keep that in mind. That is what USA Track and Field says you should be doing if you are coaching people in the cross-country 5K. This could be paired with, if you wanted to go that route, could be paired with a recovery run on the back end, because if you did a 400, you're going to want to get that acid out anyway, and a recovery run's a great way to do that. You know, 45 minutes on the back end, 6 miles typically for your high school boy on the back end, or something close to lactic threshold. So you could actually do, say, 400 meter intervals at, say, critical velocity. You could do that also on the back end, because these types of workouts, you're trying to get right at the threshold and then clearing it. And if you gave them a good rest afterwards, you could theoretically do some workout like that that's close to that lactic threshold, critical velocity type work. But I really do think that there's a really good variant that you can use in cross country. It's the variant that I use. You may come up with something a lot better from just kind of thinking about what your why is for these days, but I think there's something that better you can do for the cross-country season that really kind of also plays into this idea of knowing your pacing and things like that. That's really important for cross-country. In the track season, I'm going to do a 400-meter test even with my 2-mile kids, and I'm going to figure these things out based on that 400-meter test, either in a meet or in a workout or something like that. But in cross-country, I just think there's other ways that you can do it. And it basically involves giving them a target time meaning how long they're going to go, not a target that they have to hit for a certain distance, and then you're going to manipulate the rest to get the desired intensity. For Special Endurance 2 type workouts that are longer in nature, I usually do reps of 60 seconds, meaning I'm going to say, all right, everybody, you're going 60 seconds at this intensity, basically, based on the rest. And the rest is going to fluctuate. You give them more rest, it'll be more intense. You give them less rest, it'll be less intense. Most are going to go more than 300 meters in 60 seconds. I would hope all of them can at the high school level, especially after they do it a few times. But Few are going to go much more than 400 meters, especially because we're also not going to be on a track. We're going to be in a park, as you saw, on grass for this type of workouts. I mean, but they're definitely not getting over 600 meters. That's just obviously physically impossible. So this is all going to fit into that intensive tempo, special endurance 2 type range. When working intensive tempo, when I want to work that early on in the season, I give the tight rest, and I expand it out to special endurance 2 through the season. Probably not actually getting to true special endurance 2 in specific prep, but by pre-comp, they definitely are, and it's going to be kind of expanding out as you go through specific prep. For intensive tempo, I give them the target that will keep the intensity low. Okay, so as I said in the Special Endurance 1 video, I usually start at 2 to 3 minutes. Why 2 to 3 minutes? They're not going to get the benefit from the alactic system. They're going to be exposed to the acid accumulating early on, and that's really what we want, so they store some of this. And then you're going to progress to 3 to 4, 5 to 6, etc. until as they get more anaerobically fit and they can better adapt to what you're giving them. So that's slow introduction. As you get to where you'd like to work true special endurance 2, probably in pre-comp, rest is going to be extensive, basically repetitions or near full recovery, 10 to 12 minutes. These days get really long. If you're doing 60 seconds times 6 and you're giving them 10 to 12 minutes in between, that's a lot of time just kind of in the rest period. But it is important that they be high intensity when you get to that part of the season. Okay, so the design for intensive tempo, 1 per microcycle in early specific prep and throughout as needed. Specific prep microcycles, these tend to be longer, 9 days, because we talked about early on, we had all those workouts that are still important that we did in general prep and critically important that are in general prep, but now we are adding these other workout types, so you've got more workouts to do, and that's why they're longer. I will do a video that kind of talks about what I've done to kind of manage the idea that I can't do it based on a week myself. That might make it helpful to anybody who's kind of first trying to do this 9-day cycle. This is going to be done as intervals. Intensive tempo definitely is going to be done as intervals because it's going to be lower recovery time. So that means incomplete recovery for intervals. Interval actually refers to the rest period, and it's an incomplete recovery, and it allows for a larger amount of high intensity work. Because if you try to run mile pace, you can't, which intensive tempo is, you can't run longer than a mile. We do them as intervals, we can get more work in than just a mile. Really important, this is the one thing that I said is an important adaptation that you're trying to get for special endurance 2 and intensive tempo that leads into that. You really want to do this on a grass field that's a safe grass field without shoes on. This idea of developing specific foot strength. Okay, so if you're just kind of sitting there and you're thinking about this and you've never done a barefoot type workout before, think about if you're running in shoes. Your foot is not nearly as active, specifically the toe off, pushing off with your big toe. If you are doing this without shoes, and it kind of starts with doing things like some plyometric work on a grass field that I've talked about in alactic videos in the past, you're going to get a lot better push off with your toe if you're doing it without shoes on, because your foot's just more able to move. But the idea being is there's 2 ways you can develop specific foot strength that's helpful for improvement in the cross-country 5K. You can either never wear shoes, which is not practical, or you can do workouts like this, specifically special endurance 2 type range, so 300 meters to 600 meters at this kind of intensity. So not just, all right, we're going to do a warm-up on the infield, we're going to do a mile at a really jogging type pace. That's not doing you really any good. I mean, it might add to it if you're doing some of this other stuff, but it's not fast enough to get any real changes. Your body's just not going to get that strength you need if you're just doing, say, a mile warm-up on a grass infield, or even doing a cool down on the infield. But it's not doing enough to really elicit any changes, especially because you're just going to throw your shoes back on and have your shoes on for another 23 and a half hours before you might do something like this again. It's got to be at this intensity and distance if you're wanting to wear shoes most of the day, which most people do when they're outside their house, obviously. So that's the important thing here. Special Endurance 1 is almost too intense, and we really want to do that on the track. We need to get them running a little bit quicker. It's a higher intensity. Special Endurance 2 just seems to be, when you look at all the studies that have been done on this, the right distance and the right intensity to develop specific foot strength that can help you in the cross-country 5K, as well as in a lot of the other distance races and mid-distance races in track. You need to do it often, though. I would recommend doing it, on these 9-day cycles, getting them in every 9 days. If you're just going to do this once or twice a year, don't do it. Just do them at the track, do them whatever is the easiest for you. Don't do it. If you're going to do this, you need to do it and you need to commit to it so it can actually give you adaptations that can help you. Make sure it's on a safe field. We have a bunch of soccer fields by us. We also have a couple other empty fields that are really uniform, that they can actually do this, and it's not that they're going to step on rocks or glass or something like that. So make sure you find a good field for it. But if you can, it definitely is worth seeking out and can definitely help improve the specific strength. Rest is going to be short for intensive tempo. For intensive tempo that is close to getting them ready for specific special endurance 1, meaning it's going to be on a field without shoes, the first time I do it is I'm going to give them 3 to 4 minutes. The reason being is they did extensive tempo on grass field without shoes also earlier on, and it's kind of a similar distance, about 400 meters. So they've kind of had that little bit of that 2 to 3 minute work-in period. And they've also done some other type of intensive tempo that's closer to Special Endurance 1. So the first time I'm really doing this that's leading into Special Endurance 2, I usually give them that 3 to 4 minutes, and acid will definitely accumulate with that kind of a rest. Extent is usually 300 to 400 meters per rep. I give 60 seconds, like I said, with a total volume of 1 to 2 miles. Intensity is moderate due to the rest. I don't actually give paces. I don't want to say, I want you to hit 400 meters in, like I did with the extensive tempo video where I actually gave them a target. This one, it's just, they're not going to try and hit an actual time going a certain distance. You give them, what I actually do on this is I'll usually put markers out at 300 meters, 350 meters, and 400 meters, so they can kind of gauge, are they getting close to the same point every single time. I also talked about in the Special Endurance 1 video, you can have them drop a shirt or a cloth or something like that that's their mark on the first one, and then you want them to be consistent on all of them. You can also do that on the grass field when they don't know where the markings are because of the track. The cones, I think, kind of also helps them as they're doing it, and you're probably going to have to use cones, obviously, to mark where you want them to go out anyway. Recovery should be active. Easy aerobic work allows for acid levels to stay moderate. We want them to be eased into this, and it can actually enhance aerobic growth. If you're doing this, especially with only 3 to 4 minutes, their heart rate is not going to drop below 120 if you're doing it for that short of a rest. You can actually get a continuous run of over 20 minutes, which is for central VO2 max development. It can actually enhance aerobic growth and kind of, if there was any damage to mitochondria, start to undo some of it because of the acid that they're going to be exposed to. Medium intensity, but tight rest, okay? This means acid will accumulate as the workout goes on. The first, if you do, say, 6 of these, the first 2 to 3, they're not going to be too bad. 4, 5, and 6, they're really going to start to build this acid. This, plus them not having a strong buffering agent, allowing it to build up, means this workout is going to hurt, despite its medium intensity. Like I said, the first 1 or 2, they'll be like, it's fine, coach, we're good. By the end, they're going to be really feeling it because of those 2 reasons. They're, you're giving them the tight rest, and the acid's accumulating because they don't have this buffering agents like the sodium bicarbonate ready to neutralize some of the acid. When you return to this later, you extend the rest, and they have better buffering capacity. It is going to hurt them much less, but the reps are going to be much faster and more consistent. Just like I said, like that, when you see them early on in the season in the cross-country 5K, usually at the end, they're really, really sluggish. Later on in the season, they're much faster, and they look much easier crossing the finish line. It's the same kind of thing, and it's for this reason of acid buffering capacity. So what are some of the training designs differences for Special Endurance 2? Basically, it's where you're putting it in the year a little bit later on when they can go faster, and the rest is what's really going to be different here. So a lot of it is going to be the same as the previous slide, but the idea being is the rest is extensive. By this point, I give, by the end, 10 to 12 minutes to ensure that these are fast. They're going to be faster because they've got more acid buffering capacity, and you're giving them more rest so they can be fast. They will have the benefit of the alactic system for sure, plus the acid buffering capacity is built up, so these are going to be quite fast. Again, the extent is the same, 300 to 400 meters. I give 60 seconds. You can decide what works for you. Maybe you have something that's different in mind. Total volume about 1 to 2 miles. The intensity is hard due to the intensity is hard because of the rest, and that's usually kind of thought of as invertly. A lot of times people think, oh, you're making the workout more intense by giving them less rest, but they're going to be slower because they're not fresh. The intensity or the pace is going to be much faster because they've got more rest. So this is a much more intense workout. The acid levels are going to be much, much higher because you've given them more rest. Same thing, I would give them the markers of 300, 350, and 400 meters. And again, you can have them drop a shirt or a towel or something so that they can know where they're actually getting on each of them, because you want these to be somewhat consistent. Recovery, again, should be active for the same reason we talked about previously. Hard intensity and extensive rest means acid will be high as these workouts go on. However, the additional acid buffering capacity they've developed throughout the season means they will be very fast and consistent. They will, they're going to be really in pain the first couple times you do intensive tempo, but as you go through this, they're going to be okay. But you're going to, hurt them far less than they were in the season, but they're probably going to be much more consistent on these reps, and they're going to be much faster too. Also, again, the difference between special endurance, that was weird, special endurance 2 and special endurance 1 is the extended duration, meaning the 60 seconds versus about 35 seconds, which is what I recommend for special 1, means these tend to be a bit harder than special endurance 1 workouts. They're obviously less intense, but the idea that the acid spikes and then you immediately are in a rest period. It's that idea again of the 400 meter hurts the most at the end, but you kind of get that time in between because you're not still running. Special endurance 2, you have to run with a lot more pain. The same way in the 800, you have to run with a lot more pain. So these are, I'd say, harder workouts. Special endurance 2 are harder workouts. They linger a little bit longer than special endurance 1 can linger. But they are very important because they get them used to running with that increased acid levels, just like on the last 800 meters of a cross-country 5K. They also do definitely teach pacing, because if you go out on the 60 seconds as fast as you can for the first 20 seconds, well, you're going to be crawling by the end. So you do have to kind of teach yourself pacing and the idea of where can I get to, how can I be consistent on these and make these as fast as they can be for the rest and for the extent that's actually going on. And I think that directly teaches the pacing that you need in the cross-country 5K. So that's kind of an important added benefit that you get from Special Endurance 2 that you don't necessarily get from Special Endurance 1, because for 35 seconds you can pretty much go as fast as you can, within reason throughout that and be somewhat consistent without having to do too much thinking. You definitely do have to know what you're capable of, know your pacing if it's for 60 seconds for sure. So here's our hypothetical macrocycle. I'm going to go in reverse order just to make sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of the amount of time that I'm giving. If the state meet in Florida is the schedule for the 7th of November, that's where this is all kind of building toward. If you've got a state meet that's planned for a different time, or maybe you're trying to get ready for Foot Locker South or something like that, you're probably going to want to change this a little bit, but this is where it all is. So the competitive phase I've got set up here is 3 weeks. So first week of November and the last 2 weeks of October, so we're at 3 weeks. I've got 4 weeks for the competitive competitive cycle. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that brings us 4 plus 3. We are at 7 weeks at this point. So we've got this here, and now we're into specific prep, so we've got another 5. So 7 plus 5, how many do we have here? That's 12 weeks, as we were talking about before. So that 9 to 11 week cycle, you can hold it for 2, maybe even 3 weeks in cross country, but that's the idea of where the timing of all this is. So where do we start to see Special Endurance 2 happen? I'm not actually going to do this type of work until the 3rd week of specific prep. This is what I would sort of suggest. Now, we talked about the idea of extensive tempo being a direct lead into this, and we do 4 to 6 of those. These are on grass without shoes also, and we've got 2 of these. So these are sort of leading into it, and it's why the first time I do intensive tempo that's getting us ready for Special Endurance 2, I would say 5 to 6, 60 seconds on grass with 3 to 4 minutes. Now, when we looked at intensive tempo Special 1 the first time, because there was nothing, this is leading into it in terms of acid, but it's a different sort of extent and that kind of thing. The 35 seconds, it's the 2 to 3 minutes. That's the really short rest, lower intensity because it's so little. So if you look at the glycolytic type workouts we've got here in Pacific Prep that we called quite important, we've got 1 in the first week, and we've also got a race here too, so that's going to increase the acid levels. We've got 2 here in week 2. In week 3, we've got our first Special Endurance 2 type intensive tempo workout. And then we've got another meet here. There was a meet on... there's not a meet here in this one, but there's a test run. And we've got a meet here. We've got some hill intervals, which is kind of close to getting us the type of strength that we need there. So we've got 1 in the first week, 2 in the second week, 1 in the third week. We've got 1 here in the 4th week. and we've got another one here in the 5th week. So we're making sure that we're hitting on these. It would end up being almost every 9 days, and I'll show you again in a separate video how you can kind of get your mind around that. But the second time we're doing it, we're giving 5 to 6 minutes rest. And then probably as we get back into it, either in the first week of pre-comp or the second week, probably going to give 7 to 8 minutes. And then by the time we're through pre-comp, we're giving that 10 to 12 minute window, and probably the amount we're doing 5 to 6 here is going to start coming down as we get into the competitive phase. Just like with the other ones, intensive tempo and special endurance 1, it also got out to 5 to 6 minutes here, and you might even go on the short end here and the long end here. You might even want to make this maybe even 5 to 7 minutes or something like that if you're again trying to increase the rest as you're going through it, so it can become a little more intense. So that's how you would schedule these in. Again, if you look at the way I like to do it, if I've got something important on the weekend, there's actually a meet here. It's not a super important meet, but I don't want to, I want to go there for no reason. And same thing here. I put special endurance 2 far away from meets. Even if I'm doing like intervals or something at aerobic power VO2 max, I'm going to do those closer than me because they're not going to hurt them as much. These are hard workouts, and extensive tempo definitely isn't. But intensive tempo, I think they can do a little bit closer to the meet, 2 days here and be perfectly fine in terms of being ready. They really, scientifically get ready, or they can recover in 48 hours from this type of work and this type of work if you keep them in these parameters. If you start doing 8 or 9 of these, well, now it's going to take longer, but I just think this one, 48 hours. This one, maybe it's, 48, 49, maybe. I think it takes a little bit longer to recover from these. I've actually got a meet here. It's our district meet course. A lot of them have run on that before. So I am maybe going to be suffering a little bit here in this meet, but the fact that it's the middle of the week, there's not a lot I can do with that. There's going to be some point where it's going to happen, where it's going to be a little bit close, but that's how you could sequence these things. So let's kind of go back and wrap up this presentation. All right, so what do these workout types pair great with and pair terribly with? It's the exact same type of things that we talked about in the extensive tempo and the intensive tempo / special endurance 1 videos. They pair fantastically with a good long cool down, 2 to 3 miles. I like 3 just to make sure the volume's on point on these days. As you saw from our hypothetical on macrocycle up before, typically it's about a 7-mile day if you do the 3 miles on this at easy pace. Do it based on heart rate, not actually their recovery pace that they would do on a recovery run day where it's all they're doing. Doing that immediately afterwards is going to add to the overall aerobic development, typically about 7 miles on these days. We are starting to prime the anaerobic glycolytic system, but the aerobic system is still king. This was also going to remove the acid that did accumulate. That way, any mitochondria damage is kept to a minimum, and they're not going to be nearly as sore the next day while reducing, like I said, mitochondria exposure to the acid. So 2 things we're doing there. We're still getting our aerobic system, making sure it stays on point, and we're making sure those waste products that can become an issue with these types of workouts are minimized so that we get as much benefit with as little cost to deal with. Relaxation techniques are great on these days. Anything that brings you back down to homeostasis, they're going to be like really charged on these days, and you really want to kind of bring them back down to baseline. After your cool down and whatever your stretching routine is, 5 to 10 minutes, find a place where you can prop your legs up, eyes closed, they're just going to relax. Not only does it bring their heart rate back down to base a little bit, quickly, so they can recover a little bit faster. It also prevents the blood from pooling in the legs. That's why you kind of put your legs up. It's not just sitting quietly. It's you lie on your back, find a place where you can prop your legs up. I like finding a bench because if you kind of position yourself, you can just kind of have your calves sitting right where people would normally sit, and you use almost no muscle energy. You can do it along a fence. We do that when we're at the track quite often. You can do it up against a wall, but I do find that you do have to use some muscle energy to keep it in place, and I want to just be totally relaxed and bringing back down to baseline. So I think a bench is typically the best way to do it if you can find one. Icing, there is some benefits to icing on these days that has acid accumulation. So if you wanted to ice, these would be the days to do it. Basically, icing gets some of these things out, like acid as well as some inflammation, by constricting your blood vessels, preventing this from going out from the area, and then as soon as you get out, they open up more so, and they get rid of more than they would have had you just gone all the way through. However, I haven't really done any team-based icing. Everybody, hey, we're icing on this day, in about 2, almost 3 years at this point, because it doesn't really do anything more than what the cooldown of 2 to 3 miles will do. But the 2 to 3 miles, you get the aerobic benefit. Icing, you don't get that aerobic benefit. You just have a very long day of filling up tubs, getting ice in ice baths, and it extends the day for, if you've got a large team, up to an hour afterwards. That, I want to get, these are long workouts, you demand a lot of their time. If one or two asks, hey, I'd like to ice, I'm just feeling a little bit run down, I think it might help, great, give it to that group, but there's really no point to do it for everybody. In my opinion, there's nothing wrong with it. I just think that you get everything you need from the long cool down, as well as some of these relaxation techniques that take a lot less time. But if you would want to ice, this would be the day that you definitely would. What does it pair terribly with? Lifting, strength work after. Okay, that's the important thing. You could do this if you're doing this workout after school. You could do this workout, you could do a lifting routine in the morning. You would not want to flip those, and you would not want to do this workout and then immediately go to the weight room. Why is that? You will not get what you want from the strength work that you're doing, the lifting and that kind of thing. It's not necessarily that you're doing any harm. You're just basically wasting your time. If your strength work is designed to get them to be powerful, explosive, specific strength, those types of things, not sitting under tension, building muscle mass, and trying to lift weights that take multiple seconds to get the actual weight up, which is not anything that happens in any type of athletic sport, then if you're not trying to go for that and you're trying to go for things that are more powerful to get them specifically strong, you're not going to get that when they're super fatigued, and they're going to be really fatigued after these types of workouts. Central nervous system fatigue, the acid has caused it, just overall fatigue that's going to linger. You're not going to get what you want. So if you do this a lot, they're going to have potential strength regression. I've seen, and our sprint coach at Wharton High School does this quite a bit, plyometric work before to help prime you for the workout. I have not done that. I like doing my plyometric work on my alactic days and my hill type days, and extensive tempo just because they're not that super intense. They're very mild type anaerobic work, but there's nothing that would say research-wise that you can't do some plyometric work before. Don't do it after. Do it before. It can prime you for the workout. It can add some specific strength, but what you don't want to do is a lifting routine, especially right after this. And I mean, you could do plyometrics before. Definitely wouldn't want to do them after. They just don't do you any benefit to do them after anyway, because you're too fatigued to get what you want from the muscle elastic strength. All right, so some key points here to wrap things up. Intensive tempo and special endurance 2. These workouts, they continue the process that you started. This includes continuing the clock in the peaking window of 9 to 11 weeks by creating acid accumulation in a safe way early in specific prep, becoming much harder later on. Starting with intensive tempo intensity, either with targets, meaning you do it based on the 400 meter if you want, the 400 meter percentage, or by manipulating the rest and giving them a time that they're trying to go until you blow the whistle and say we've gone 60 seconds, will allow them to safely progress into more intense work, namely special endurance 2, which comes after as they are ready for this harder, much harder anaerobic type work after they've done some of this stuff. Rest should be tight to start out and then progress out, 2 to 3 minutes at the beginning of intensive tempo, and expand this each week until they are ready for true special endurance 2 type work, where the rest will be 10 plus minutes. You might have a group that can handle this and might do it actually in specific prep, getting close to that 10 plus minutes. I've never had a group that was that type, that could do that, so I'm usually not to that point until pre-comp really gets going, and you do it for a couple weeks, and then you start to alter things as you get into the peaking window. So this is best done on grass without shoes. We talked about we need them to be fast on these days, but we also can develop some specific foot strength that can help improve cross-country 5K success. Again, don't do this once or twice a year. You're going to have to commit to it. Like I said, those extensive tempo workouts you saw, and then these workouts are really important for all of this. So basically, if you saw in specific prep, we've got 5 weeks of it, and 4 of those 5 weeks we've got a grass shoeless type workout. So we're doing it almost every single week, and we'll do that through pre-comp and the competitive phase. If you're going to do it, make sure you're doing it so that you can actually adapt to it. It is important, and it can definitely help with some specific strength for the cross-country 5K. And last thing, end with a really good cool down routine. These are hard days. These are very hard days. They're going to be accumulating a lot of acid. You want to get them back down to baseline as quickly as possible so they can do what makes them great more on the more aerobic type days. Going 2 to 3 miles at the end, good stretching, using some relaxation techniques. You can ice also, can help bring you back down to baseline after these first acid accumulating days in the special endurance 2. Intensive tempo, and then eventually special endurance 2 later on. and just help them, again, get back to it. We want to get the anaerobic glycolic system as good as we can, but we also want to make sure that we're not hurting the overall aerobic development, which is still king in the cross-country 5K. So if you like this video, please think about liking or subscribing or sharing it around with others that might find it helpful. As I mentioned, I'm going to do a video on planning out a 9-day microcycle. I'll also do a video that really just kind of talks a little bit more about that specific foot strength that you can develop different ways throughout the season in the next little bit. So look forward to those. And until next time, this has been Coachy TV.